Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to our session on energy in South Asia. We will have 5 presentations, and it will start with our presentation with Kai and myself, and then it will continue with Deepak and further. Our presentation, which is presented by Kai and myself, is going to give you an overall an overview of the low carbon energy transformation in South Asia in 4 countries, but also China. So China, India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. And I would like to give the digital floor to Kai, but before that I will introduce Kai to you. Kai is a master's student, and he is a master's student studying industrial engineering at Technical University of Berlin, and at the moment he is writing his master's thesis on renewable fuels at Enertag, a renewable energy company. Kai, the floor is yours, and you can go ahead.
Yeah, it's okay. Very nice.
All right. Then yeah, thanks Abdullah for introducing myself, and also please excuse my technical problems. Yeah, we want to give you an overview about the low carbon energy transformation in China, India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. And what do we want to present to you? We just want to give you an overview about the figures, some statistics regarding the total energy supply and the generation capacities, and talk about energy economic trends and the developments of the region. What do we use for that work? Basically, we relied on reports and statistics from the International Energy Agency, supplemented by documents from the national authorities, and also some scientific papers and studies. About the region, China, India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan combined make up more than 39% of the world's population, and they also have a share about 36% of the world's total CO2 emissions. However, their individual share is quite different if you compare them to each other. For example, on the right figure, you cannot even see the share of Pakistan and Afghanistan regarding their total CO2 emissions, and whereas, for example, for China, they make up more than a quarter of the world's total CO2 emissions. So the reason behind that is, of course, the different CO2 emissions per capita, which have also been displayed on this chart. As you can see, in the last 10-15 years, especially for China, they increased heavily. China's is about 7 tons per capita in the moment, and for India and Pakistan, they're also on the rise. Reasons for that are, of course, the economic catch-up processes and the general economic development, and the expansion of coal plants, for example. But yeah, those figures are quite alarming regarding climate change. We digged a bit deeper into the installed capacities, and on this figure, I gave you an overview about those 4 electricity mixes of the 4 respective countries. Regarding the right figure, Afghanistan, you have to be a bit cautious, because you have to know that Afghanistan is importing about 80% of their electricity. So those numbers here are not very meaningful, but Abdullah will talk about that later as well. Regarding the other 3 countries, you can see that they rely heavily on thermal capacities, mainly coal, but also oil and diesel. And all the three countries have also a tiny share of nuclear, which they expand. And the rest is hydro and renewable fuels. Regarding those renewables, you can see on this chart that hydro is still the dominant driver, but especially in China and India, you can see a steady increase of wind and solar capacities in the recent 5, 6, 7 years. Especially China has made big progress among the extension of solar and wind capacities, adding 50, 60 gigawatt of capacities every year. Regarding the countries, just want to give you a quick overview about the capacities in China. They have about 1,200 gigawatt of thermal capacities there, which is just a gigantic amount compared to India, with about 200 gigawatts, about a fifth or a sixth of China's coal capacities. Also interesting, India has still about 20% of their total energy supply comes from biofuels and waste, whereas for China, for example, this share is quite low with about 3.6%. Yeah, so all in a nutshell, we try to assess the strategies of China and India regarding the low carbon energy transformations, and according to the World Energy Outlook, regarding China, the projected emissions are about 3 times as high as permitted in the Sustainable Development Scenario. And there are also like ongoing high investments into fossil fuels and expansion plans of the Chinese coal plants, not only in domestic China, but also in neighboring countries. Abdullah will talk about that as well. So these numbers and facts seem quite dramatic. However, on the recent 75th General Assembly of the United Nations, there were the promises to peak the CO2 emissions of China before 2030 and to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. And yeah, the upcoming 14th five-year plan, where all those economic developments are being described, will be crucial, which I think will be discussed and ratified this week. Yeah, that's regarding China. For India, the numbers are seem a bit more optimistic. The emissions are about 2 times as high as permitted in the Sustainable Development Scenario, and the current NDC targets, which India set themselves, seem to be met according to the Climate Action Tracker, and they assess India's energy policies at 2-degree compatible. That's in a nutshell for China and India, and Abdullah will continue with Pakistan and Afghanistan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kai. Before I go ahead, we are not sure if Deepak has joined us, the next presenter, and I would like to ask Lucas if he is there among the participants or not. And the other presenter, Rasheduzzaman, that he has access to, presenting his, sharing his screen and everything. Yeah, so I will continue from here. As you can see here in this slide, Pakistan, the energy mix is quite heavily dominated by fossil fuels. To the right side, for example, you see the thermal and the projects, the ongoing projects, and the projects under constructions are also many of these projects are based on fossil fuels, and nuclear is also gaining a big share now. It's becoming a big source, and renewables are also, of course, being implemented, but it's the share is not so big, as you can see in the charts and also the pie chart. Regarding Afghanistan, it's an interesting case because 80% of its electricity is imported from northern neighbors. That's Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and these countries from Central Asia. And 80% of the electricity is imported, so the domestic production is only around 520 megawatt. So that's a really small number. And only around 30% of the population is connected to the grid. Although there are rural population, rural villages do have access to electricity, but not the grid. And there are some thermal plants, and these are basically diesel generators in big metropolitan cities like Kabul. As I was talking about the domestic production capacity, it's 520 megawatt, and from that, almost around 50% is hydro, large hydro, and these are the large dams which were built during the Soviet Union years, but also prior to that, and they have been rehabilitated over the years since 2001. And thermal, these, as I was just saying, these are mostly generators, diesel generators, and also a gas to electricity plant in gas-fired power plant in the north of Afghanistan. And the share of renewables is really small, and it's not doesn't come in the statistics, but not because it's too small, but the data on Afghanistan is really hard to find. And here we wanted to discuss the low carbon energy transformation in the region. What are the barriers and what are the trends? Of course, this has been talked about a lot during the conference, that the renewables, the cost of renewables is coming down and it's already competitive. Some of these resources are already competitive with fossil fuel sources. So we don't need, I think, to talk about this anymore. What we want to talk about is that in these countries, in all of these countries, on Afghanistan, there is not reliable data if there is fossil fuel subsidies. But for Pakistan, China, and India, we found data that there is substantial support for fossil fuel still. And these supports amount to billions of dollars in the case in all these three countries. Another factor and another trend, which also could prove to be a barrier to low carbon energy transformation, is one could say that the Chinese influence in the region and its investment, for example, if we talk about due to time constraint, if we talk about only, for example, Pakistan. Next slide, please. You see, first we want to show you this map. Look at all these bilateral or multilateral agreements that China has with all these regional countries. And if you only talk about this dark blue line, which is called China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Next slide. Yeah, this is that. So within this, if you look at the energy projects within only this agreement with Pakistan, you see the brown bubbles. These are the planned or under construction fossil fuel power plants. So these are planned or under construction. And if you look at if you look at the map, there are many of them. And if you look at the red or pinkish bubbles, these are nuclear power plants also planned in or under construction. And these are all going to be done with in cooperation with China. Next slide. And another trend which we could also think of it as a barrier to low carbon energy transformation is the energy transfer projects from Central Asian countries to South Asian countries. Central Asia is considered an energy-rich block of countries because of their huge fossil fuel reserves. And South Asia is considered as an energy-poor region, but with a lot of population, with a huge population. So there are now many projects, regional projects, and we listed 3 of these major projects. These are multi-billion projects. For example, the CASA, Central Asian, South Asian Electricity Transmission and Trade Project, CASA 1000 is a part of actually a bigger arrangement called Central Asia, South Asia Regional Electricity Market. And they want to, this project is actually based on surplus hydropower plants from Tajikistan and the Kyrgyz Republic, and this will go to Afghanistan. This will pass from Afghanistan and give some electricity to Afghanistan, and then, but most of it will go to Pakistan. And then you have TAPI, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, natural gas pipeline. This is almost a $10 billion project, and it's supposed to transport gas from Turkmenistan to Afghanistan and to, but mostly Pakistan and India. Afghanistan will only get 5 million cubic meter per year, but Pakistan and India, they will get 14 each. And then you get, you see the other major project, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan. This is also based on fossil fuel. Next slide, please. So this is the map of, just to show you, this is the map of CASA 1000 project. It starts from Kyrgyz Republic, comes to Tajikistan, and then Afghanistan, but the end destination is Pakistan. And next. And this is the TAPI pipeline, the natural gas pipeline, which ends at Fazilka in India. Just to conclude, so these countries, if you consider them individually, the CO2 emissions, for example, if you consider them these CO2 emissions, some of the CO2 emissions per capita, for example, in some of these countries, is high, for example, in China. But if you look at Afghanistan or Pakistan, in Afghanistan in 2016, the CO2 emissions per capita was 0.2 metric ton. And in Pakistan, it was 1. But if you consider that or compare that to the EU is 6.5 metric ton per capita per year. And for example, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, the focus is on economic development, not so much on renewable energy development. I think I explained quickly the developments in the region, the regional energy transfer project. And the last point, COVID-19, I want to end here because this will be talked about in the last presentation by Rasheduzzaman. Thank you very much. Okay, the next presenter is actually Deepak, and I think Deepak is still not here, and he was also supposed to actually discuss our presentation. So yeah, maybe we go ahead without him. And when he joins us, then he can have his presentation. If you have questions, you can ask in the chat, I think, or in the Q&A. Yeah, since we do not see any question at the moment, maybe we continue with the next presentation. But if you have questions, you can write in the chat and we will respond to you in the chat, or you can always contact us at the addresses that we provided. So the next presentation after Deepak is by Alexandra Krumm and Constantine Lefler. They present on the energy transition in India. I will give a short introduction to them, and then they can start their presentation. Constantine Lefler is a PhD student at Technical University of Berlin and is also a guest researcher at DEW Berlin. He has a background in economics from Technical University of Berlin and is currently working in the field of energy system modeling. His main research interests are decarbonization pathways for the energy system and the integration of renewable energy sources. And Alexandra Krumm is a PhD candidate at the Rainer Lemoine Institute and the Technical University of Berlin. She is also part of the Colexit group, which is a research group at the Technical University of Berlin. And yeah, she has a master's degree in industrial engineering from the Technical University of Berlin. The virtual floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to present our research here that Constantine and me have been working on with the title that Energy Transition in India, Quantifying Effects of the Low Carbon Transition on the Indian Energy System. I guess, so we've just heard a short introduction of the Indian energy system, but I will give a brief overview on our motivation and to get everybody on board. So the Indian energy sector is, India has a substantial renewable energy potential on the one hand, and is the fourth largest in terms of renewable energy installed capacities. However, on the other hand, the energy system is still characterized by a high share of coal, with the biggest share of installed capacity overall, and is the second largest coal consumer globally. And in the figure, you can see the distribution of the coal resources and renewable energy potential. And basically, you can see that the renewable energy deployment is not evenly concentrated, or capacity is not evenly concentrated across India, and it is highly concentrated in basically 8 states, which are accounting for 75% of the overall potential, and on which are mostly in the west part. On the other hand, you can see the coal reserves are mainly in the east part of the country, and as the electricity demand is in the west part, the coal has to travel long distances, which is costly and puts a high burden on the rail service. And we also heard that due to rising population and industrialization, India has the key challenge for India is meeting the rising energy demand, particularly due to, or partly because of the industry sector, and therefore key challenge is to meet the rising energy demand by ensuring energy security and reducing energy poverty. Keeping this all in mind, we wanted to analyze the development of the Indian energy system under varying CO2 constraints, and therefore looked at the sector-coupled energy system, including the sectors power, heating, transportation, industry at the state level for India, and we used the open source energy system model Genesis mod. I will now go into I will now talk about a little bit about research design, basically the model and the scenarios that we looked at. So you can see here the model design and technologies and data that are used in Genesis mod, and the model is a linear optimization problem where the total system costs of a given energy system are optimized for a time horizon. And the pathways are computed with a model determining the cost optimal capacity addition, supply mix, storage uses, and energy flows. I will not go into more detail. If you have questions, you can always ask them later or send an email. And so we looked at 2 scenarios. First, the delayed action scenario serves as a base to compare the impact of a CO2 budget on the Indian energy sector development. And the scenario does not include any carbon budget, but instead showcases more of a least cost approach, performing only a techno-economic optimization of the transformation of the energy system without, as I said, special consideration for CO2 emissions. And in contrast, or we compared this to a 2-degree scenario, focusing on the fulfillment of climate targets with a budget for India that is compatible with limited global warming to 2 degrees Celsius. And we considered 31 regions comprising the 28 states and the Union Territories Delhi, Puducherry, and Jammu and Kashmir. And data is mainly taken from government sources as well as from leading institutes and academic literature. So let's dive into our results, some key results. And first, we can see there's a strong trend of growth spanning across all sectors, and the primary energy demand, as you can see here, is drastically increasing for both scenarios. The effect is especially prominent in the delayed action scenario on the left-hand side, showing a steep increase in primary energy consumption that mostly comes from fossil-based energy sources, which remain a dominant force in the energy mix with over 70% share of total primary energy in 2050. In contrast, on the right-hand side, you can see the 2-degree scenario there. With an increased sector coupling and electrification, which leads to a slower increase in consumption of primary energy in the later years. And solar is the dominant source in terms of renewable energy potential in both scenarios, followed by wind. And here you can see the main sectors that we looked at: the power, transportation, and industry sector. And we can see that the share of renewable energies is increasing in all sectors in both scenarios, being promoted by the favorable conditions and strong cost reduction. And this holds especially true for the electricity sector, where we can see that even in the delayed action scenario, electricity generation is almost 100% renewable in 2050. However, in the transportation and industry and transit sectors, a non-negligible share of oil and coal remains in the 2-degree scenario, and particularly in the daily action scenario, we can see that those two fields have a big share, particularly due to no political pressure to reduce emissions. These two sectors are kind of the key challenges to decarbonize. Yes, so we can also look at the regional distribution of in 2050 of the power generation, as we consider the 31 states. And we can see that basically the southern and western states of India have the largest demands, and therefore also the highest amount of power production. Furthermore, we can see that wind is predominantly used in the southern and western states due to high wind potentials, especially during the monsoon season. And northern India relies largely on solar and hydropower for the cost of the electricity mix, as there is a large hydropower potential due to the Mara regions. And we can see that offshore plays only a small role and is seen in the southern part of India. So the last slide for the results is the results in context of climate ambition. So we can see here the government plans for India and our model results for the delayed action scenario and the 2-degree scenario. And overall, the government pushes renewables. There are plans that in 2022, there's a target to install 174 gigawatt, including 100 gigawatt of solar energy and 75 gigawatt of wind power. And there's also an updated government plan based on this plan that has been announced by Prime Minister Modi at the United Nations Climate Action Summit 2019, which is not yet official, but we consider this plan as well. So basically this figure shows us that the delayed action falls short in both solar and wind capacities in 2020. However, both scenarios surpass even the yet unofficial new government plan, as we can see. And solar installation in the 2-degree scenarios almost doubles the updated government plan and almost triples the planned installation of wind turbines, which is quite striking. And we have like 2 key findings from this figure. So first, the government plans for 2030 are not sufficient to uphold a carbon budget that keeps global warming below 2 degrees Celsius. It is significantly below the 2-degree and even below the delayed action scenario for 2030. And the second key finding is that the targets, if enforced, do however make a meaningful difference in the upcoming years, as the delayed action scenario does not take into account any lower bound for capacity additions, and lies below the government set plans for both wind and solar. And this means that political targets can fill the gap until renewables are not only cost competitive, but actually cheaper than their counterparts. So now the last slide, which is kind of a conclusion and the implications from the results for the Indian energy sector. And first, I think that's was quite obvious. There is an immense need for fast expansion of renewable energy sources across all sector and also above the mentioned government plans. And these ambitions, the ambitious efforts to expand renewable energy must be accompanied by an equally ambitious coal phase, which means that there should be no construction of new coal capacities to meet electricity demand in the future. Our third implication is that it is necessary for policymakers to act and enforce policies to push forward the energy transition, as neither the NDC nor the NEP are sufficient to reach a pathway compatible with global warming of maximum 2 degrees Celsius, which we showed in the slide before. And the last point is mainly concerning, or especially concerning the industry and transport sector. These are hard to decarbonize, and we showed that there are still that fossil fuels is still playing a major role in 2050, and therefore alternative and innovative concepts are necessary to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius. This means, for example, an increase in efficiency, investments in renewable energy, or also microgrid systems. So this was our short presentation of our results. Thank you for your attention. We're looking forward to your comments, or if you have other comments, you can see our contact details.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alexandra, for this very interesting presentation. The discussant for this presentation is Neshvin Rodrigues. I invite Neshvin to come online and discuss the presentation shortly. Briefly, before Neshvin discusses the presentation, I just introduced Neshvin. Neshvin is an associate fellow at the Electricity and Fuels Division of TERI. TERI is the Energy and Resources Institute in India. His area of research focuses on power system modeling, power system planning, distribution system modeling, energy storage system, and electricity markets. Neshvin, please, floor is yours.
Hello, can you just confirm if I'm audible?
Yeah, very good.
I'm Shubham Thackeray from TERI, so I am speaking on behalf of Neshvin here. So first of all, thank you for the presentation. It was wonderful about the insights on the India's on the energy model. So, so here I would like to ask a few questions related to the model. First of all, I would like to begin with the implications that you draw from the model. Here I would like to ask that how you understand by the updated government plans, because here I can see that the solar and wind buildups are very much higher in the case than the government targets. So is there any key message or suggestions and recommendations that you would like to give which can help to further the transition?
And I'll just add to that. So I think we've seen clearly the importance of a model that has sector coupling. because when you're talking about scenarios that go up to a net zero target, it is very important to include a lot of the sector coupling agents like hydrogen, heat, industrial energy requirement and all. So although we may not have a lot of policies in this regard, so I think based on the study, what would you suggest some of this policy outcomes or learning should be in terms of including sector coupling in our energy transition, which is not spoken about a lot in India.
Thank you.
So I think we can start. Yeah. So we see that these are the couple of points where we can start the discussion on.
Thank you. I will start with the last question because unfortunately I couldn't hear the first one properly due to my connection. But the second one, I think the sector coupling is a very important issue due to the as we showed, the power sector can be decarbonized quite easily, if you want to say so. So taking account the other sectors and also the interplay between the sectors should be maybe stronger, should be considered in future research and especially the interplay between the sector coupling and efficiency and how to really decarbonize, especially the industry sector, will be quite a challenge in the future. I mean, it's this in almost every country. So India is also, so sector coupling will be like a key challenge and should be considered in future research. So
thank you. Thank you, Alexandra. I think maybe the second question you, Neshvin, and the colleagues can get in touch with Alexandra, because we are well behind the time plan. So we maybe we go, and we also have Deepak back with us. So maybe we go ahead with the presentation and with Deepak, because Deepak was supposed to present second. Yeah. Thank you, Alexandra and Neshvin, for the discussion. And Deepak, if you can hear us, please start your presentation. I give a short introduction to Deepak. Deepak is a PhD research scholar in the Center for South Asian Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. His research interest lies in interdisciplinary approaches to energy, climate change, and geopolitics, particularly focusing on South Asia. Yeah, Deepak, please go ahead. Okay, Deepak has left, I think. I don't see him anymore. So the next presenter, according to the time plan, is Neshvin. Yeah, so we invite Neshvin. I gave an introduction to Neshvin. Please, Neshvin, you start your presentation.
Hello, can I ask if I'm audible?
Yeah, we can hear you, and your screen is also shared. You can go ahead.
Hello, I'm Shubham Thakre from the Energy and Resources Institute, New Delhi. I am speaking on behalf of my co-authors here in TERI. So the topic of our research is India's power sector transition to 2030. So as we see the current context, the current policy push that the government of India is giving, we see that by year 2030, the government targets to have an installed capacity of 450 gigawatts of renewable energy. And this is a very challenging task, not only in terms of installation of this high capacity, but also in terms of the variable renewable energy integration, because of the variation of supply during the day. So here we try to understand what are the various challenges and how we try to address it using an operations model for the year 2030. For this purpose, we use an unit commitment and economic dispatch model. So this is important to assess how the variation during the day occurs and also the seasonalities. It is also here known that India has a very large share of coal generation. So when by the year 2030, there would be a very high requirement of flexibility into the Indian power system. So here we tackle these challenges by looking at three perspectives, looking at the technical details, the temporal, and the spatial details. So when we look at the operation constraints of the generations, we look here at the what are the various parameters like ramp rates, the technical minimum of the power plant, the startup cost. So here in the model, we represent the generation in form of each and every unit, whether it is a fossil plant or whether it is a variable renewable generator. Then further, we further look at the the variability and we capture it using a time series operation. So we look at the demand and supply from this perspective, and not only the hourly variation, but we also look at the 15-minute temporal resolution. This is because we see that there would be a very high ramping requirement by the year 2030. So in order to this, we have also tried to understand what would be the requirement and flexibility in the grid. And further, in the model, we see that it is very important to look because there are each state in India here represent one node. So accordingly, we have a full representation of interstate transmission system. So each of the generator, the demand has been represented by each of the state. So if we look at the demand and supply numbers for year 2030, we have two broader scenarios. If we look at the baseline scenario and the high demand scenario. So here we look at the peak demand, which would be there by year 2030. So here we estimate the 303 gigawatt of peak demand in a baseline scenario. And this we have estimated using the 19th Electric Power Survey that by the Central Electricity Authority of India publishes. And when we look at the generating capacity in our model, we have a baseline capacity which is currently in line with the policy targets of India, and also the high renewable energy scenario, which envisages on the target of achieving 450 gigawatt renewable capacity by 2030. So which is again optimistic. Then now if we look at the scenario framework, as already mentioned here, in both the scenario we have 26% and 32% variable renewable generation in the mix. And we here look at the power system flexibility with various perspectives. Here we look at the degree of thermal flexibility that can be provided by the central and state generating stations. So it is quite interesting to see here that the central generating station in India are they are owned by the central government, and they have a high degree of flexibility, whereas the state plants here have a higher technical minimum. So this is a very huge challenge in form of managing the flexibility later on, so which we'll see into the results. If we talk about the transmission system, we have a fully development of the interstate and inter-regional transmission line, and the government of India has a target to develop the green energy corridor and increase the VRE penetration into the grid. So here is a broad representation of scenarios that we represent in our model. So here our research question is on the grid integration of renewables, and the two scenarios which are the baseline and high renewable energy. Looking at the flexibility, we look at different kind of flexibility scenarios in terms of the low thermal flexibility that are possessed by the state power plants, and a high thermal flexibility represented by the central generating stations. We further look at a scenario where we have energy storage represented in model and how it can help further in providing the additional ramping requirement and flexibility when India has an evening peak, and this requirement requires a high ramping rate. So these questions we have tried to answer in our model. Further, we have answered this by addressing the transmission scenario. Here we have an unconstrained and an expanded transmission scenario where we try to look the power flows that are required for year 2030, and an unconstrained transmission scenario where it is quite comfortable to transfer power between the interregional and interstate lines without any further constraint. So so now we'll try to see the key messages that comes from the model. So first of all, we look at the broader picture of the conventional coal and hydro fleet. Here plays a very crucial role in the short term. On the left, if you could see the representation of a dispatch stack the nuclear and the coal fleet mostly provides the base load. However, the role of coal power plants has been looked into a picture where it can provide additional flexibility and not just a baseline load. Also, in the purple stack, you can see here the hydro pondage. India has a large amount of hydro power plants, and mostly it can be seen that it is used to meet the early morning and the peak demand during the evening. So this is highly represented here, and achieving this is mostly required by addressing the technical minimum of coal power plants that we have seen in the model. That by achieving a 55% technical minimum, it is highly beneficial. Further, we here see a policy push to see the two shifting of thermal power plants for some units. So this is because the continuous operation of plant is not feasible during the day. So few technical interventions are required that needs to be addressed. And for the hydro, as earlier said, that it provides the fast ramping resource and seek the purpose of providing the peaking. Now, the key message to here is that the role of battery storage and the pump storage in our model. So here we looked at two contrasting scenarios. The first one on the left, if you can see on the top, there is the total curtailment from the solar and wind on one particular day. So here, if we see that the total curtailment is quite high and it reaches a total of 6 to 7%. And on the right is a scenario where we consider the battery storage considered in the model. So it is not only seen that only the solar and wind curtailment reduces during the operation model, but it has also been seen that the coal power plants are actually not aggressively cycled during the day. So this is a very important aspect here to see the trade-off between how much investment has to be done in operation and maintenance in the coal power plant and the role of battery storage, which can be used to meet the peaking purpose for the evening peak. Now, the key message coming here another is that the crucial role of facilitating the high share of renewable through the interstate and interregional lines. So here the two plots show the power supply position from each of the state and interregional lines. So the red here shows that the state is exporting power during this particular timestamp, and blue means it is importing because the demand is quite high than the supply of that particular state. So if we look at these two contrasting scenarios, one at on the left is a scenario at 1 p.m. and the right is at 9 p.m. So here we see that the high renewable energy potential states, they provide this additional integration of renewables by acquiring this the role of by having interregional lines. They are able to export the power to the states which are deficit in this energy to meet the high demand. But on the right here, we can see that during the evening when the solar and wind is quite less. So the states like Chhattisgarh and the eastern states which are high in peathead coal, so they export the power to such states which have high peak demand during the evening. So here we see an important message that integrating the regions and having a synchronous grid is quite beneficial for India. Another key message, if we look here, is the role of the total system cost. If we look at year 2030, now here we see the role of the fixed and variable cost in the system. On the left panel, you can see the total fixed, variable, and the system cost in the various scenarios that we have considered. If we look at the fourth and fifth bar, the fixed cost in the system are increasing quite a bit. This is because we have a high installation of solar and wind energy in the system, which increases the capital cost. But here we see the variable cost that which is decreasing because the zero marginal cost generators have increased, and this means that the system cost has not increased that much. That is of more concern. So here we see that that renewables by 2030 can be integrated quite easily at no extra system cost. Thank you. You can ask the questions.
Thank you very much, Shubham, to discuss this very interesting presentation. It looks coal is playing a big role, but we leave the discussion to the next presenters, who are Professor Mufazzal Hossain and Dr. Mirza Rasheduzzaman. So we ask them to come online and discuss the presentation given by Shubham.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Right.
I just want to, sorry, I just forgot to actually introduce you. I think Professor Hossain is not presenting, so it's Dr. Mirza Rasheduzzaman, and he is a assistant professor at Bangladesh. And just your introduction. Yeah, he's an assistant professor at Bangladesh University, and he has a PhD and a master's degree from Sheffield University in the UK. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Very nice presentation. Thanks for your presentation. So I was just wondering, like when you showed like the one state can supply to other state when there's power in demand. So what do you think this idea can be applied for a country like Bangladesh, which is regionally is not so big like in India? So do you think it's going to be beneficial for Bangladesh as well, or so what do you think? That's I want to ask about your presentation.
You're muted. You're muted.
So how can we take this idea and we can maybe implement in Bangladesh as well, so that we can be benefited as well?
No, Shubham is muted. Shubham, we cannot.
What about now?
What about now?
Yeah. So the purpose of the study itself was to, so we have a lot of models that run on a capacity expansion model that gives us, like, something like a optimal capacity mix for different type of generators and flexibility reserves and so on. The purpose of this study was basically to analyze what are the operational constraints. So if you can see in India, we have really old thermal generators, and even the new generators are not very flexible in terms of their ramp up, ramp down rate and so on. So the question that we try to answer here is, in the short term, how would the integration of more and more renewables affect grid operation, right? And would the power, the power or the generator portfolio be sufficient, or the type of portfolio we have, would that be sufficient to maintain or to meet the required flexibility coming from the addition of more renewables without a lot of curtailment? Also to assess all these components and to identify their role in this transition part of, the operations part of energy transition. And coming to the question on how it can be incorporated for Bangladesh, I think we can, a similar model can answer questions that are very similar. So I'm not aware of the power system portfolio in Bangladesh, but I think it would be quite similar to what we have here, and a similar study can also be carried out to highlight or to give solutions to these problems.
Thank you very much. You can type your questions in the chat. And now we have a question by Professor Christian von Hirschhausen from Technical University of Berlin.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Shubham and Nashwin, and thanks for organizing this interesting session. I just have a detailed question actually to you and then also to Alexandra and Constantine, and it's on the role of nuclear power. You have independent of the scenarios you have in the base scenario and in the renewable scenario of the 17 gigawatts of nuclear. I wanted to know what plans these are and how do you model the intermittency of nuclear power? And I'm a little bit surprised to see a relatively high figure. So what investment costs are you using there? And the same goes also to Alexandra and Constantine now or at some later date, because that I think is an interesting and also relevant question for the neighboring countries, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and of course China. Thank you very much. Thanks for the presentation.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Christian. Basically, currently in India, we have something around an order of 6.7 gigawatt of nuclear capacity, and something in order of 10 gigawatt proposed plan for next 10 years. So by 2030, we are proposing something in order of 16 to 17 gigawatt of nuclear capacity. Most of the nuclear capacity in India considered to be as a base load operation, and will not consider for any flexing operation, and is a perception of all the operators and the grid operators that we have here. And in the modeling purpose itself, we use nuclear as a baseload operation of this capacity.
Yeah, just one question. It may be a little bit rhetoric. Have you ever heard of Fukushima?
Yeah, definitely in Japan. Yeah.
Nuclear is no baseload. Nuclear has, well, it explodes from time to time, unfortunately. But in particular,
yeah, definitely.
But what I'm really saying is that nuclear is stochastic to the extent that you have to refuel it every once in a while, and you have outages. And we're currently studying. We're at the same level as you are. We have in our models we have nuclear from time to time, but we should address this because it's intermittent and it has an effect on the backup that you require. So let's put this on the agenda and let's start to work together.
Certainly, this is a very interesting area where we can further research on the flexing of nuclear, particularly in India, because this very much solve so much of issues related to flexibility. So yeah, for further research, this will be definitely a very good suggestion from us. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, if you have questions, you can always write them in the chat and also get back, get in touch with the presenters. Now we have the next presentation, which is very a current topic on COVID-19 and lockdown and things that we are really familiar with by now. It was supposed to be presented by Professor Hossain, who is a professor and head of department at the University of Liberal Arts in Bangladesh, but I think now Assistant Professor Dr. Mirza Rasheduzzaman, who is also an assistant professor at the same university, will present on consequences of the lockdown due to COVID-19 on the electricity generation and environment. The floor is yours, Dr. Rasheduzzaman.
Thank you. I believe you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you and we see your presentation. Maybe if you click on the presentation mode. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. A very good afternoon to everyone. My name is Mirza Rasheduzzaman. So I'm here to present our work on behalf of my co-authors, Shamim Hasan and Professor Hossain. So in this work, we are going to look at the consequences of lockdown on electricity generation and its positive impact in 3 countries, Bangladesh, India, and Sri Lanka. So first, we'll have a very brief overlook of power sectors of these countries and what are the main sources of electricity generation and what are the main sectors where this electricity is being used. Then we'll look at the sectorized greenhouse gas emission. So one of the motivation of this work, as we all know, that COVID-19 has a profound impact on every aspect of our lives. It's like one of the biggest natural crisis since, especially in the last 100 years. So in this work, we are actually, as I mentioned already, so we wanted to look at the impact of the reduction in power generation, especially during the period of lockdown in these countries, and how the carbon emission was reduced in the from March to July by comparing the electricity generation and carbon emission in 2019 and 20. The reason we chose these three countries because if we look here, all these countries, they basically use fossil fuel as the primary source to generate electricity. So, and they're very close. So in India, it's 97% fossil fuel, in Bangladesh, 98%, and in Sri Lanka, it's 90%. And the renewable energy is like very less. Sri Lanka, 10%, Bangladesh, 2%, and India, 3%. So this is, we found this is like one of the similarities why we chose these three countries. At the same time, since we are talking about the impact of COVID-19, so if we look here, so India, we can consider it was highly, or just among these countries, it was the most affected countries, 113 deaths per million. Then we have moderately affected Bangladesh, 51 deaths per million, and Sri Lanka, it was like very less affected by COVID-19, only 21 deaths per million. So these are the similarities, and these similarities with basically why we chose these three countries. The power sector in Bangladesh, it can be actually divided into three sectors. First is the generation, then transmission, and distribution. So in Bangladesh, we have government-owned Bangladesh Power Development Board with generous electricity, as well as we have some independent power producer and some small independent producer. So these are the three companies they generate power in Bangladesh. Then when it comes to transmission, is solely controlled by PGCB. It's a government, it's a private limited company, sorry. So this is the company which is responsible for transmission, and the total length of transmission line is 11,649 circuit kilometer, of some of which are 400 kV, 230 kV, and 132 kV lines, respectively, of these values. So what Bangladesh Power Development Board, they do, they basically purchases electricity from these public and private generation entities, as mentioned here, and they sell to the distribution utilities. So we have generation companies, then we have another company who is handling the transmission, and the generated power is sold to these distribution companies, which are Dhaka Power Distribution Company, Dhaka Electric Supply Company, West Zone Power Distribution Company. Then for rural areas, we have Bangladesh Rural Electrification Board, and for northern areas, we have Northern Electricity Supply Company. So this is like the power distribution of Bangladesh, mostly, as you can see, DPDC, they have 14%, and these other companies, they have rest of the share. As we talked earlier, Bangladesh basically generates most of its electricity from fossil fuel, and among those, gas is like 58% of electricity is generated from gas. Then we have furnace oil, 25%. We have coal, we have diesel, and very less is generated by hydro, and some electricity is imported from India. And when it comes to technology, as we can see, the major share is this reciprocating engine and steam turbine, 38%, and steam turbine we have 12%, and combined cycle we have 38%. There is something I want to mention. Since we talked about the solar home system in Bangladesh, but as of the national grid, the electricity generated by solar cell is very negligible, although the government has taken the initiative to generate 10% of electricity by the year 2021, and very recently, a few months ago, 70 megawatt, which is the largest power plant based on solar, was implemented, and it was connected to national grid. So the government is working on it. So hopefully we'll see more and more electricity is being generated by solar cell photovoltaic. So when it comes to India and Sri Lanka, the power sector, we can see that in Bangladesh, the majority of electricity is being used in residential applications. Then we have industry. Whereas in India, the most of the demand on electricity is basically from industrial industry. Then we have residential, agriculture, and commercial. Then very few for transportation, only 2%, and others. Interestingly, in Sri Lanka, transportation, we can see that 38% of the demand is actually from transportation. Then we have only 24% from industrial demand, and the rest residential, agriculture, and commercial, we have 40%. So if you look at the data here, in Bangladesh, residential demand is the highest, whereas in India it's industrial. So now we want to see how the COVID-19 affected the power generation in Bangladesh. So as we can see, in Bangladesh in 2020, the lockdown was declared by the government in April, and if we talk about the severity of lockdown, basically April and May, these 2 months, while we had like the total lockdown in Bangladesh. So if you look at these figures, so this is the daily average generation of electricity in Bangladesh for the months of April, May, June, and July. So the red graph represents 2019, and the green one 20. So as we can see, when the lockdown period, during the lockdown period, the generation of electricity actually reduced because there was less demand. So when the lockdown was lifted, or it was eased later at the end of May or early June, we can see that the power generation basically more or less same as what we saw in 2019. So we basically wanted to have a closer look in the month of May. So if you look here, we can see this is the daily average daily generation in the month of May, and as we can see here, the generation actually reduced significantly in the 3rd and 4th week of May. And this is the maximum generation, daily generation. So it basically follows the same pattern as the average generation in May. So as we can see, due to COVID lockdown, there was less demand on electricity, and there was less generation as well. So this is an average generation. So if you look here, that in the month of May and April, when the lockdown was in place, the generation actually reduced quite significantly. In April, it was 12.71%, and May it was 16.96%. So and the total generation actually followed the same pattern. So as we mentioned, the lockdown in Bangladesh, basically the total lockdown was during the month of April and May, and there was significant reduction in demand and as well as generation. So as we can see, the maximum decrease or the reduction was in the month of May, 16.96%. Now let's have a look at India. So as we can see, in India as well, so this is the month of April and May compared to Bangladesh. In India, in April, the electricity generation actually decreased significantly compared to the electricity generation in 2019. And in India, the main sources of electricity generation is coal, as we can see. And so during the month of April and May, as we can see, the generation in India decreased as well. And when it comes to generation from renewable energy, the hydro is basically the primary source of for renewable energy in India, as we can see. And we can see that the electricity generated from hydro in India is increasing steadily. So here we can have a comparative analysis of electricity generation in the months of January to August in the year of 2019 and 20. So in 2019, the electricity generation was very higher than what we have in 2020. And in India, the main primary source of electricity generation is coal, as we can see from here. This is the carbon emission. It's just a trend. We can see that as we already saw that in Bangladesh, the residential demand is the highest. So we have electricity and heat with the primary source of carbon dioxide emission in Bangladesh. And in India as well, this electricity and heat is the primary source of electricity carbon dioxide emission, and followed by agriculture. And in Sri Lanka, actually, the highest amount of carbon dioxide is emitted by transport, followed by electricity and heat. Now we'll have a closer look at the individual energy sources, both in Bangladesh. So here we have a figure where we can see the daily CO2 emissions. So from all the greenhouse gases, we basically looked at carbon dioxide. In Bangladesh, as we already mentioned, the primary energy sources are coal, natural gas, oil, hydropower, and some imported electricity from India. So the daily carbon dioxide emission in the month of April and May actually reduced significantly, as we can see here. If we look at the carbon dioxide emission from different sources, here we can see some interesting results. So when it's come to natural gas and hydro, the electricity generation for public and private sector in natural gas, it was more or less same. The percentage, the change in percentage is not as significant as we can see from coal and oil. So from natural gas, as we can see, the power generated in 2019 and 20 during these 4 months was more or less similar, and as well as the carbon dioxide emission from natural gas. So what happened during the COVID-19 period, at the generation from coal, actually, although it decreased in the month of May, but it's actually higher than the year of 2019. So the data shown in green is for 2020, and this is from 2019. So in average, the electricity generated from coal was higher, and whereas oil, as we can see in private sector, the electricity generated from oil is actually was very less in the month of April and May. But when the demand actually increased, as we can see, the private energy generation companies, they actually started generating their electricity from oil. So what we deduce that when there was less demand, basically the government stopped buying from these private energy generation companies. As a result, we can see a decrease here. And if we see, yeah, sorry.
One more minute, please, so we can have Deepak to yeah.
Yeah, sure. So should I wait?
No, I meant you can go. You can, if you can finish in 1 minute, so we can.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. So as we can see, the carbon dioxide emission, and actually, as I said, the coal actually, the electricity generation from coal actually increased. So we can see like significant increase in the electricity generation from coal. So I'll go over these results very quickly. So yeah, we actually saw a very significant reduction in carbon dioxide emission in the month of April and May, which the peak reduction was 22.3% in the month of May. So this is like the concluding results. So as we saw that India was the highest affected among these 3 countries, then Bangladesh and in Sri Lanka. So the power reduction in India was -28%, in Bangladesh 70%, in Sri Lanka 22%, and you can see the carbon dioxide emission reduction was the highest ones in Bangladesh 22.3%, then in Sri Lanka 20%, and India 7.8%. So yeah, I'd like to conclude here. Thank you everyone for listening.
You can now stop your screen. Thank you very much. Very interesting presentation. There is certainly a lot to catch up and a lot to discuss. I found especially interesting that in Sri Lanka, for example, the transport sector uses so much electricity. Interesting. So we are supposed to, Kai and myself, we are supposed to discuss your presentation. We found your abstract really interesting. And in the interest of time, and so that we can allow Deepak also to have his presentation, we keep it really short. I just want to cite a report that came out, I think yesterday or the day before yesterday. IEA reported that although in the beginning of 2020, the CO2 emissions globally plummeted, but actually, if you compare it with 2019, the whole year, now it's towards the end, the emission levels are even higher than 2019. That's globally, but very interesting figures. Kai, do you want to ask or comment on?
Yeah, maybe just, well, thanks for the presentation. Just point you already also mentioned regarding the high transportation share in Sri Lanka. I had the same question in mind actually. Do you know why this figure 36% is so high if you compare it to India or Bangladesh, or is there any particular reason why they use so much electricity in the transport sector?
To be honest, at this point, we are not exactly sure. So it's it's still an ongoing work. So as you can see, we basically looked at the results from Bangladesh in very detail. So we were still in a process to look at the figures from Sri Lanka. So I guess from the presentation slide that there are less results from Sri Lanka. We primarily focused on India and Bangladesh. So we are still looking on the figures from Sri Lanka. So hopefully we'll find an answer to that question.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Okay, Deepak has just written that he is here and he wants to present. Deepak, we are really sorry that there is so much time left, but I think you can also blame yourself a little because, yeah. But anyway, if you're ready, now you can already start your presentation, and we are going to end in 6 minutes roughly. It's a shame that we couldn't have Deepak's presentation because he wanted to discuss geopolitics, a very interesting topic, at least to myself. But it's really it's a shame that we couldn't have his presentation. I would like to thank all the panelists here, and please tune in. And we have really interesting presentations today and also tomorrow. We thank everyone, all the presenters and discussants here. Thank you very much.